So try and avoid distractions. Yeah. No, I've put to keep your camera switched off. I think that's probably more for people working at home and your connectivity. So when I work from home, the camera is usually taking up broad bandwidth. I've been reliably informed. So if your bandwidth is a little bit shaky, then switching your camera off might help. Um, After the training session, I will be liaising with Vicky, but I will probably send through an email to you all with a link for some feedback so that you can say what you think about the session, if that's okay. Okay. So the aim of this session is to give you an overview of searches and reports functionality in EMIS Web. By the end of the session, hopefully you'll have a clearer idea of what they are, be familiar with some of the housekeeping that you're able to do in the population reporting module of EMIS using folders, and then be able to create a search using rules, features, and criteria. And they can include patient details, coded data, and medication courses and issues, amongst other things. There are many features that you can use to create searches. I'd also like to just emphasize, and I was talking to Vicky about this before we started, that you may be able to access existing searches and adapt or use those existing searches that you have access to. And then once you've got your searches and used those and happy with those, you can create reports based off those search results. Is everyone happy with that? Okay. So the first question, and this isn't the question I'm putting out there, I'm just asking this to give an answer. What is a patient search? I did think quite long and hard about this, but I've put that up on the screen there. And it's a little bit convoluted, but basically in EMIS, a patient search uses rules, and the rules are based on features upon which criteria are applied. And by doing that, you identify a cohort of patients that meet the criteria within the practice population. Okay, which sounds great, or alternately sounds very convoluted. So I've kind of tried to break it down or clarify it. But the main three things, I guess, I've put in the blue text there. So searches use rules, and the rules are based on features, and they use criteria that are applied. So the rules are things that, the data has to pass or fail. Okay. And the features are things like, a patient's gender, their age, whether they're taking any medication, if they've got any specific conditions, that sort of thing. And then to those features, you apply the criteria. So if you're looking for a gender, what gender is it? If you're looking for an age, what age range? What sort of condition is it? What type of medication? Those are the criteria. And by doing all of that, you identify a group of patients, a cohort. And I've given an example there, female patients aged between 25 and 65 with asthma who take salbutamol. And that's within your practice population. So it's important to remember that you're only looking within the practice that you have access to using EMIS. Okay. And usually it's the currently registered patients at the practice. However, if you're searching historically, so if you're looking within the last year, 2 years, 6 months, then you may want to change that focus to patients who were registered previously or who have since left or deceased. So it is important to think to yourself, what group of patients am I looking at? Is it patients that are currently registered at the moment, or am I looking across a sort of period of a year or so since the search date that you need to search on? Okay. I'm happy to share these slides, by the way, so if you want a copy of these slides, you're welcome to them. So we've talked about a search, and obviously the search will generate the group of patients, but then accompanying that or complementing that is a report. So what is a report? And again, a report is a way of presenting the results of a patient search. You can use all of or parts of the features of the search, but as they apply to individual patients who meet the criteria of the search. So it's more of a way of presenting the results of a search. You can add additional features to the report for viewing purposes, but those features that you add will not change the search result. Okay, and like I did with the search, I've kind of added a bit more to that definition using the colors. So the report is for example, the report looks very often like a table, and it has column headings. And you will see headings for things like, if you've included it in the search, the age, the gender, the condition. Also, you might see the other criteria. So you'll see individual patient names and how they meet that criteria of the search. I mentioned that you can add additional features to the report. So you can include columns for things like if a patient has, say, diabetes. And if that patient does have diabetes, you could include that information in your report. However, it's important to remember that you're not going to be adding additional patients to the search result. You're only going to show whether or not the existing search, the existing cohort, has those other features that you've added to the search, the report. Hopefully it will become a little bit clearer when we actually see this in action in EMIS. Okay. So the basics of searches and reports, and these are the things that you'll need to have in order to be able to use searches and reports in EMIS. So we'll need access to population reporting in EMIS. Okay, and we'll see what that looks like in a moment. And it's a good idea to create a folder to keep your searches and reports in. You don't have to. You might use someone else's folder, but it's probably a good idea to have your own folder. Before you actually start creating a search, I've mentioned this already, is there one already made that you could use? So that might be a search that's already been created by a colleague, and that might be someone within the practice, or it might be a colleague across a different area that can share a search that they've created with you. It might be a search that you find in the EMIS library. So there is an EMIS library that has searches that are created by EMIS. Or it might be a search created by a third-party supplier. So you may have heard, or you may have heard people mention an organisation called Ardens, and Ardens are a third-party supplier who provide searches and templates for practices to use. Okay. Bearing this in mind, is there a way of, do you have a search that you could copy and paste into your folder and modify using some of your own rules or criteria? So again, this is going to make your life a little bit easier if there's something already out there that you can modify. As I say there, it's a quick win if you can do that, and it's relatively easy. Once you've got your search, running the search is relatively straightforward, but I guess there are some things to consider. When is the best time to run a search? And I'll talk a bit more about that when we actually come to do the demonstration. And do you need to run it on a regular basis? So should you consider creating a schedule to run your search? Does it need to be run weekly, monthly, etc., etc.? Once you've run the search, looking at the results of the search, do you need to just have the headline figure? So is it just a number that you're looking for, or do you need to look in a bit more detail? So if you do need to look in a bit more detail at the search results, then you're probably looking at creating a report. And once you have that information, do you need to export it? Do you need to have it in another format that you can manipulate? So, for example, would you need it on a spreadsheet that you could, create charts off of, or maybe make something like a pivot table out of? So all of these things we can look at. Okay, at this point, I'll just pause for a moment and check whether anyone has any questions. Okay, and I've got Vicky putting her hand up.
Only a very quick one.
Yes,
Will you show us how we know if a search has already been done?
yes. Oh, yes, I will indeed. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So I'll just ask before I start. So can everyone see my EMIS? Okay, I'm getting nods there, which is good. And I should have mentioned on the previous slide that this is a dummy system. Okay, so it's all dummy data. If there's anything that you see that looks like something that might be real, that is purely coincidental. And of course, I'm assuming that you all use EMIS to run your searches and reports on. So I'm on my dummy system, and as I mentioned in the slide earlier, you will need access to population reporting, and I'm going to go to population reporting from the ball in the top left corner. There's my reporting module, and there's population reporting. Okay. Now my version of EMIS is probably a few versions behind yours because it's a dummy system, but it should look fairly similar to what you have at your practice. So what you would see is the name of your practice and a folder structure that looks fairly similar to what I have here. So you'll have folders. Hopefully the folder structure that you have there has a naming convention that's a bit more appropriate than ours. So our training folder structure has the names of individuals rather than, themed folders. So, we've got folders for different delegates who've done the training. Okay. Some of these folders, as you can see, have folders within them. So we have subfolders, if you like. Okay. And in the bottom left corner, you have access to other sort of shared areas. So for example, here in the bottom left, I hope you can see that, I've got an EMIS library and you will have a similar thing. Unfortunately for me, my EMIS library is empty. It's got nothing in it because EMIS don't provide dummy systems with a library, but yours should have content. And you may have other sections in this bottom left that allow you to access pre-existing folders with searches in. So for those of you with a long memory, I've got a section called Avon PCT, and that has sort of shared folder with searches in, but not many searches in, as you can see. But these are all slightly old. Okay. So the first thing is worth doing, I think, as I mentioned, is to create a folder for yourself. And the way to do that would be to select the folder, either the heading, the top of the hierarchy, in this case, Avon Practice 1 for me, or if you want to create a folder within another folder, select the folder that you want to put your folder in. I'm going to put mine at the top, and then I'm going to click on Add in the top left, and you can see that most of the options there are grayed out. But the one option that is available to me is to add a folder. Okay, now, because I've got multiple screens, this little box has appeared on one of the other screens. So I'll just bring it back in and I can give my folder a name. And this is where it's a good idea to think of what sort of naming convention you want to use here. So, it might be let me type in personalized care, for example. Okay. And I can click OK. Now, do bear in mind that the folders are sorted alphabetically. So if I type it in personalized care, it will go down to that place in the structure. Okay, if you want your folder to be near the top, I would check with your colleagues at the practice first, because they might not want you to have their search structure changed in any sort of way, but you would put a number. So if you number your folder, it tends to go near high at the top. But as I say, do check with your colleagues before you think about doing that. And my folder for personalised care, as you can see, is near at the bottom because it starts with a P. But that's my folder. The contents of the folder appear in the main screen, and as you can see, because there's nothing in it at the moment, it's empty. So I've now got my folder. I can now start creating searches, and I can save them in my folder. Are there any questions? Okay, lovely. I shall continue. So now that I have my folder, you'll notice that these options in the top left are now visible and active for me to use. And I'm going to create a patient search. So there are a variety of different things I can do here, but if you're searching for patients and if you want to create reports for patients, then you would use that first option of patient and search. That brings up the new search dialog, and we can start adding our details. Okay, so I'm going to name my search, and I'm going to abbreviate it slightly. So I've given it a name. If you abbreviate the name of the search, it might be fairly straightforward to understand what it is anyway, but if you need to clarify, you've called the search and explain in a bit more detail, you can clarify the detail in the description. It's not mandatory, but it might help. I mentioned earlier in the slide that you base the search on your practice population, but you can base it on not only the currently registered patients, but all patients. So if you're searching within the last year, you might want to consider not basing it on the currently registered patients, but on all patients, because that would include patients who have since, left the practice within the last year, or deceased, for example. So that's something to consider. If it's patients that you want to capture who are still at the practice, then you can use the currently registered. And as I said earlier, chances are that will be the one that you use most often. But if it's something where you're looking for patients historically, then I might consider using all patients. Okay, I'm going to use the currently registered. Okay, by the way, if you don't choose one of these, it will tell you to go back and choose one. So you do have to choose one of those radio buttons there. And I'm going to click OK. When I click OK, my screen kind of blanks out. I get the name of the search at the top. It tells me that no rules have been created as yet. And it also informs me that if I run this search now without adding any rules, it will return all active patients. So it will just basically show me all the patients that are currently registered at the practice, which is not really what I want. So I'm now going to start adding rules to my search. To do that, I'm going to click on this link here. I get three choices. It allows me to create a new rule, or I can use an existing rule from the library, which is the EMIS library, or I can use the results of a previous search. Okay. Now, again, by and large, you probably want to create a new rule, but it's worth bearing in mind that there are other options. Certainly, if you've got a search that you want to use as a basis for this search that you're creating now, then you could use that third option of use existing search results. But we'll use a new rule. We'll create a new rule from scratch. Okay. and we get another box that's empty. This box is called a feature builder box. So we are going to choose a feature to base our rule on. And when I click on the link for features, it shows me the different features that I can use that are available. Okay, so you can see I get a list of features starting at patient details. So am I looking for a patient's age or gender, that sort of thing, date of birth? Am I looking for a registration detail? Am I looking for a clinical code? So am I looking for a patient's condition like asthma or diabetes, or, you know, are they housebound? Are they in a care home? That sort of thing. All of those things are coded. Am I looking for specific medication? So at this point, you are choosing the things that you want to search on. Now, because I'm looking for patients that are over 70 years of age, I can choose that first option of patient details. Okay. And I now have the beginnings of a rule. So it tells me that I'm including patients where the patient details are, and then it allows me to choose a specific thing within a patient details. So again, I'm clicking on the link. I get a much larger list of options, and these are all patient details, and I can choose anything from this list of patient details. Because I'm looking for patients that are over 70 years of age, I'm going to choose age as my detail. Okay, got that. And that brings up this box, and this allows me to specify exactly what I'm looking for here. So, you know, if I was looking for somebody younger than a certain age, I could choose younger than. Or if I'm looking for somebody older than, which I am, choose older than. If I'm looking for patients within an age range, I could have younger than a certain age and older than a certain age. Okay, actually, hold on, there we go. Now, why isn't it letting me do that? That's interesting. Okay, it's not letting me choose the and, but you can use an age range. Figure it out in a moment. What I'm looking for is older than 70. Okay, so I'm going to pop those details in there. If you wanted to older than, or to have older than or equal to, you could use older than or equal to. And so the rule that I've created here gives me this part of the search. Okay, and I can click OK on that, and that's my first rule. So it's a very simple rule. It's going to include patients that are older than 70 years of age on the search date. So in other words, when I run the search, if I run it today, are they older than 70 as of today? Okay. Now I'm going to add the second rule. So I can click on the link there to add another rule. I'm going to create it from scratch. I'm not going to use an existing rule or the results of a previous search. And again, it allows me to choose a feature. And this time I'm looking for housebound patients. Now, this is where you need to know a little bit about EMIS and how it works. So certainly housebound is something that you would record on a patient's record using a code. So patients that are housebound are coded as being housebound. So it wouldn't be, for example, in their registration history. So for me, that might be something I would think, oh, I wonder if it's something that's part of their registration details that they're housebound. It's actually something that's coded. The good news is if you look in somewhere and it's not quite right. So if I choose registration history now as an example, and then I click on the link to add criteria, you know, I can see that there really isn't anything in there that meets what I'm looking for, I can always go back and I can delete. I can go back and start again. So I'm going to use the option of clinical codes. And again, it says include patients with clinical codes where, and I'm going to add criteria to this feature. And again, we're presented with quite a long list of choices here. The good news, as far as I'm concerned with the clinical coding, is that that first option of clinical code and new code is probably the one that you'll always go for. Okay. Occasionally, you might choose one of the other options lower down, particularly if you've already added the codes. But for the most part, you'll be using new code to search on. I have to say, just for reference, that I've never ever used the library code list to search on. I've always used the new code list. And the reason for that is that I know that the new code list includes all of the available codes. And when you select that option, it brings up the code selector, and some of you may well be familiar with using the code selector within EMIS already. And I can now search for those housebound patients. So I'm actually going to type in the word housebound. So long as I spell it correctly, it should show me all the results that are available for me. Coded entries, these are for housebound patients. And you can see that I get 5 results. I get housebound, no longer housebound, temporarily housebound, housebound patient review, and housebound patient review again. Just for reference, if you ever see the in italics EMIS code, that usually denotes a historical code. So in other words, it's in the system, but it's in there historically. So it's something that's come from a previous version of EMIS or a different clinical system. So it's not a code that you would use actively, but it's there to capture historical information. So I'm actually going to use the housebound option there. And I double click, and you'll notice it now goes down to the selected codes. And you can see that there are actually 2 codes there. There's a housebound code, but it has a what they call a child code, which is temporarily housebound. Now, if I leave it as it is, it will search for not only the housebound, but also the temporarily housebound. If you don't want to include any child codes, you can remove them. Okay, and you can see that when I do that, it shows that that code is excluded. And it says exclude some children, which sounds a little bit worrying, but it's referring to codes that are children of the main code. Okay. If I tick the box again, you can see that that information is removed. If you only want to include the headline code, as it were, the top code, you can right click and you can see that you get the option include just this. Okay, so if you only want to include that top code, then you can do that. Again, you can always include all the codes and run the search, and then go back in and remove codes if you need to. I'm going to leave that ticked, so I'm going to include the temporarily housebound. And click OK. So now my rule tells me that I'm going to include patients with clinical codes where the clinical code is housebound, but we also know that that includes the code of temporarily housebound. I can click OK to that. So now my search has 2 rules. First rule is patients where the patient detail is that they are older than 70 years, search date. And the second rule patients where they have a clinical code of housebound. And although we can't see it, we know that it includes temporarily housebound as well. Okay. Now, I'll just point out what's going to happen with each of these rules. So when the first rule is passed, the patient will go on to the next rule. If the patient fails that rule, they'll be excluded from the final result. Okay. If they pass the rule, they go down to the second rule. And if they pass the second rule, they will be included in the final result. If they fail the second rule, they'll be excluded. Okay. So in other words, all of the patients within the practice population get tested on whether they're 70 years of age or more. If they pass that, they go to the next rule. Are they housebound? If they pass that, if they've got that code within their record, they'll show in the final result. I go up into the top left, and we can see we've got a number of options to save and close. If I don't like what I've done in my search, I can close. Now, depending on your practice, your time of day, how busy it is at the moment, you might want to decide to run it at a different time, in which case you'd save and close. I'm going to save and run it, of course, but bear in mind that if it's a sophisticated search, it might take a little while to run. This is a fairly basic search and it's on a dummy system, so hopefully it will run fairly quickly. So I'm going to click on Save and Run. It will just ask me to confirm that I'm happy to run the report. I shall say yes. And even on my dummy system, with no other people using it, it queued for a couple of seconds. So if you sort of translate that to where you are, when you run your search, you as I say, you might find that some of your searches might queue for a period of time. So do bear that in mind. And as you can see, my patients who are 70 years of age or more who are housebound has brought me a result of 1. So that is the result. 1 patient meets the criteria of my search. Any questions so far? Looking for hands, looking for people to come off mute. Okay. Do feel free at any point. So my result is 1. It shows me what proportion of the total population that is. Now, you can see that 1%, that's, I mean, on our dummy system, we have 2,500 patients. So it isn't really 1% of that. So it's an estimate. I mean, it won't do 0.00 of a percent. So 1% is not accurate. It tells me when this search was last run. So I don't know if that was the question that you were asking, Vicky, but yeah, it will tell you when it was last run. So it was today. Of course, had I not run it, it wouldn't show a date at all. It tells me what type of search it is. Virtually all of your searches will be patient searches. If I schedule the search, it will show me that there is a schedule here. It will show me a little clock, and we'll see that in a moment. If I've used coding in the search, if I've used a code in the search, it will tell me what code system I'm using. Okay, so in this case, I'm using SNOMED CT, which is the coding language. So that was the housebound part of the search. Okay. You might occasionally see, particularly if you're using a search that you've borrowed or copied from somewhere else, you might occasionally see read v2 or read, which is the previous coding system that we used. But for the vast majority of the searches that you'll see on the system, it will be SNOMED. Okay. So all that information is in the main part of your folder. Then the detail of the search is down in the lower part of the screen here. So we've got the heading, the name of the search, which is housebound patients over 70 years old. And it gives us the details. So it gives us the description of the search, and that's what I wrote underneath the name of the search. It tells me the parent population, so that's where we decided, are we going to use the currently registered patients? Do we want to see all patients, including patients who have left or patients who have since deceased? So that would be if you were running a search sort of within the last year or so, sort of thing. Again, it just confirms that I'm using a coding system in this search, which is SNOMED. And it tells me who the author is, when the search was modified last, when it was last run, and something called a relative date. And I'll explain relative date a bit later. It also gives me the result here. So it tells me what the population count is, which is 1, and how many the parent population. So that's the practice population. And you can see here that the excluded patients, the patients who don't meet the criteria of this search, is everyone else. So that's 2,499. But you also get some other information down here. So you get a tab for the definition of the search, which are the rules. Those are the rules that I created to run this search. I get a tab to show me the split of age and gender. So my one patient is in the is a female patient and is aged between 70 and 79. If I run this search across a period of time, so run it on a regular basis, that will allow me to plot a trend for this search. So I've run it today. You can see that that's where it is today, but if I run it tomorrow, next day, the next week, whatever, I will get a trend. And then I've got tabs that show me which patients are included in the search, which patients meet the criteria, and which patients don't meet the criteria, those excluded. So these tabs across the bottom here, once you've selected the search you want to look at, will show you all that information. So really useful information if you just want a quick sort of overview of the results. With the patients included, with the population included, you can look in more detail at specific patients. So I've got one here, of course, but I can right click on this patient and I can look at, you know, their summary, their consultations, their medications, their problems. So I can go into their record and have a look at the more detail. Okay. If I decide that I want to change the nature of the search, change the criteria, add more rules, adjust the rules, I can edit the search. So I can either use the edit button on the ribbon, or I can right click, can edit the search, the pop out menu. Okay. Any questions? Any questions? Okay, good. So I mentioned at the start that you might already have some searches that you can use that have been created by someone else. I'll just demonstrate how you might do that. So for example, I happen to know that I've got another folder called Personalised Care. And in that folder, I've got some searches that I've managed to locate that might help me to locate cohorts of patients that I want to investigate. So I've got a search called homeless individuals, and we'll look at the detail of this search in a moment. And I've also got a search called patients in long stay nursing and residential care. So obviously you might want to discuss with you the person whose searches they are, if that's appropriate, whether you are able to use those. But I want to take that one and put it in my folder. So I'm going to click on it like that. And when I right click, you can see I've got the option to copy. So you can copy and paste searches. I'm going to take that, put it in my, there it is. Okay. And I'm going to do the same for so you can copy and paste searches. Not only that, I can go into a different section. So for example, I do have a section for GP contract and QOF. Okay, and in there, I've got a folder devoted to cancer, which includes the denominator populations. So I want to take that and run it. You'll notice, and you might find the same yourself, where you are, when I right click on it and I think, right, I'll run it from here, it doesn't allow me to run it from this space. So occasionally what you might find is if you go into a different section of your population reporting, that you might find that there aren't, those searches are there, but you can't run them from there. You have to actually copy them out. So I'm going to take a copy of that folder. I'm going to go back to my folder and I'm going to paste it in there. And it will allow me to paste that entire folder plus any subfolders into my folder. Okay. And once they're in my folder, I can edit them, run them. So for example, the homeless individual search. Let's have a look at that. I'm going to go to edit. So this is the search that I copied for homeless individuals. You can see it has one rule, and I'll just open that up for you so that you can see it in a little bit more detail. So it includes patients with clinical codes, and I'll just open up the codes for you. So as you can see, it includes patients, and it looks at all of these codes. Okay, so I should say this is not a search that I created. This is a search that I've taken from EMIS. So it's looking at all of these codes. So you've got everything in there from adult foster home living, homeless, scroll down, you've got housed, lives in a bedsit, and I think right near the bottom there I saw, yeah, sofa surfer. Okay. Now that's the first part of the rule. But then there's an additional part because it then specifies that we need to order those codes by date and order them and select the latest. And once you've done that, ensure that the latest is one of these. And I'll just open these up and you'll notice that we have substantially fewer codes. So in other words, this search is going to search for all of those codes initially, but then from those, ensure that only these are the most recent. So the patient might have all of those other codes, but these are the ones that are most recently in the record. So we are looking for patients that are homeless, lives in a squat, sleeping out, sofa surfer. Okay. So what this search is doing is casting the net very widely, but then specifying that the most recent codes, the most up-to-date codes in the patient's record are that the patient is homeless. And I'll show you how to do that in a moment. And if I run this search, can't guarantee that I've got any results on my dummy system, but again, I'll run the search and we'll see. Takes a little while to run, even on a dummy system. Still queuing. Okay, so currently on my system, I have 3 patients that meet the criteria. And again, once I've got that result, I can check what the age split is. So when I go to the age split, for example, I can see that some of my patients are male, a couple of them are male. In those age ranges, a female patient slightly older. I can a trend if I run it across time. And of course, I might want to see who those patients are. So it show me the population included. And from here, I can go in and look at the information. Okay, so before I go on, are there any questions? Any questions? Okay, fantastic. So what I'm just going to do there is to demonstrate how you can add a number of codes and then specify an order in which the search will find the codes. So we saw that in the homeless individual search where there are quite a few codes around homelessness, but then it then specified that the latest code should be that the patient was homeless or a sofa surfer or okay. So what I'm going to do is create a new search. Or actually housebound. I'm going to specify over 50 years. And I'm also going to specify female as well. And cross my fingers that we actually get a result. I'm basing this search on the currently registered patients. Click OK. I'm going to start by adding some rules to the search. And the first thing I'm going to add, the first feature that I'm going to add is that the patient is female. That would be gender. These are the current options that you're able to choose from when you select gender. Okay, so currently this is what's available. I understand that this is going to be updated in the not too distant future. So there will be a little bit more choice, I think, coming soon. And I think the same will be the case for ethnicity as well. I think they're going to update the ethnicity to the last census that we had, which I can't, was it 2021? Can't remember when it was the last census was. So I think currently they're using the 2011 census, but I think it's going to be updated. So I'm looking for patients who are female. And because I'm in patient details at the moment, and I want to find patients who are over a certain age, I can also use the age as well. And I'm going to say 50 years of age this time. So I've actually added 2 rules in there, but because they're in patient details, it's probably easier to do that. I could separate those out as 2 separate rules if I wanted to. And that's my first rule. The next rule is going to be the housebound rule. I'm going to do something slightly different. I create the rule. Because I'm looking for housebound and I know that's something that would be coded in a patient's record, I'm going to use clinical codes as the option, as the feature. And then I'm going to choose from the new code list I'm going to use all of these codes. So I'm going to include not only housebound, but no longer housebound, temporarily housebound. I'm even going to include the historical code there. I'm going to use all of those. Okay, but then I'm going to specify that housebound needs to be the latest one. So this is how we do that. So instead of clicking on this link here to add more criteria, I'm going to restrict the existing. I'm going to click on restrict, and I'm going to restrict by date. When I click on that option of dates, you can see that it allows me to choose the latest. Okay. So now it says include patients with clinical codes where the code is, then it shows me the list of codes that I've chosen. Ordering by date, select the latest and check that. And then I add it back in. And the one I want to have as the latest is housebound. So that one is the one I want as the latest. Again, if I want to include temporarily housebound, I can leave that in there, or if I want to exclude it, I can do so. So what this is going to do, it's going to look for patients with these codes. Then it's going to choose patients where the latest of those codes is housebound. And that is my second rule. Okay. So the first rule will identify a female cohort of patients over the age of 50. The second rule within that cohort will identify patients with all of these codes, then narrow it down to just those with the latest as housebound. Again, I'm going to run that search. Again, it takes a little while to queue and a certain amount of relief on my part because we do have a result. So we've got a result there. Okay. I'm just mindful of the time. So we've created a search, or a number of searches, where we've added some rules using a variety of different features and criteria applied to those features. At the moment, the way that we're looking at the information is just the numbers, but in order to look in more detail at the information, we'd use a report. So the report is based on the search, and I'll use this search here because it's got the most results. It's got 3, and the reports sit up on the population reporting ribbon in the report group here. Okay, these are reports that allow you to generate a patient list, or if you want the addresses, you can include those, or if you just want their age and gender. I'm going to go straight to the auto report, and if I select that and run that report, you can see that I don't have to create any rules. I don't have to do any criteria because it's based on the existing search. But if I show you what that looks like, so go to view results, the report shows me the details of the search as they apply to the individuals. So in other words, it gives me the information about those patients. From here, I could print those out. I could export that information onto a spreadsheet. But I can also edit this report. So if I want to, for example, remove the EMIS number, don't need that. I can get rid of that. If I want to add more information in the clinical codes, I can add more information in the clinical codes. For example, if I wanted to add any text information that had been added as part of when the clinical code was added, I could tick on the value, and that would add any free text. I can even add additional information that may apply to these patients. So, for example, I can add a second heading for clinical codes here, and I can specify another code. So, for example, if I wanted to include whether or not the patient had a certain condition, like asthma, which has a lot of children, which I could exclude or include depending. Now, as I mentioned earlier, when you do this sort of thing, it's not going to increase the number in the result of the search. It's not going to change the search result, but it will show you if those patients already included have that condition. So again, I'm just going to give the term, the date. And I can run that search again. You'll notice that the reports sit indented underneath the search that they're linked to. And again, if I review the result, and it just happens that of my 3 patients, 2 of them have asthma in their records recorded. Hope you can see that okay. So when we create a report, we're looking at the information that's been used in the search, presenting it in this way, but we can add additional columns with other information if we'd like to capture that. Doesn't change the result of the search, but shows us additional information if it's there for those patients. And again, I can print that out. I can export that to a spreadsheet, and then from there, I can create whatever data I want to in terms of charts or pivot tables. I'm mindful of the time. Don't know if anyone has any questions. Happy to go on for a few more minutes and cover a few more things, or we can finish there.
Probably only got about another 10 minutes, but if people need to go, please feel free to go if you need to.
Thank you if you've joined, and thanks for joining. Just a couple of other things. So with the reports, you know, as I say, you can obviously export those results out and add additional information to those reports. In terms of searches, I did mention that you can use the results of existing searches to base a search on. So, for example, if I go to my, let's see if I can find one that's got some, actually go back and try that one. Let's choose, actually, let's choose this one here. So I'm going to create a search. And this time, on meds, I'm going to base my search on the results of a previous search. So I'm going to use the example results from, and then I'm going to search, and I'm going to choose C, this search here. So I'm basing this search that I'm doing now on the results of a previous search, the homeless individuals. And then I can again add my rules. This time I'm going to use medication. And this will be medication issues. And I can choose a drug. And in a similar way to when we were adding codes, you can select the medications that you want to search for your cohort. So I'm going to choose paracetamol. And I might also choose salbutamol as well. Okay, so you can actually include a number of codes or medications when you add in this way. Okay. So my search is basically looking for patients where they've received a medication issue of paracetamol or salbutamol. I'm going to run that search now. And because I've based that search on the results of a previous search, you'll see that it's indented from that search. So it's kind of just in slightly from that search. And it just so happens that all three of those patients have got that medication. So they've either all on salbutamol or paracetamol, one or the other. And again, from there, I could run a report. I'm going to go for the auto report again. And if I go to look at the results of that, you will see that my patients gives me their patient details, but it also gives me how they meet the criteria. So I can see that a couple of my patients have had the salbutamol inhaler, and one of my patients has had quite a lot of paracetamol. In fact, it goes on to a second page, which is a little bit of a worry. Okay, so this report is based on a search that was based itself on the results of a previous search. And as I say, you'll be able to see that visually within your folder. So if I go to my meds on med search, you can see that it's based on the homeless individual search. And I guess one of the benefits of doing that is that it means you don't have to keep creating the criteria, the rules every time. If you know that you've got a search that captures a certain population, you can then create searches off the back of that. Okay. Are there any questions? Any questions? Please, can you explain where immunizations are found? Oh, thank you, Claire. Yes, so in EMIS, if you want to look at a patient's immunizations, you can go to the population. So I'll choose one of these patients included here. And if I right click, remember you can look in more detail at the patient's record. I can go to care history. Okay. And that will take me to this patient's care history. And in care history, you've got a a button that allows you to filter out all the immunisations. Okay. If you were searching for immunisations, then you would be searching using the medication issues feature. So if you were wanting to search for patients' immunisations, I'll go back. Your search would be for immunisations. Let me just modify one of these searches. Okay. So the feature you would use when you add the rule to search on be medication issues. And then you would type in your immunisation. Now, just wondering if I can find a COVID one. I've got a feeling that all the ones that I pick will probably be wrong, but Depravera, have I got that there? No, so you would, but then you would search for it there. So I'm afraid I can't remember the name of any of the immunisation. So, but that's how you would search for the immunisations. Just bear with me a moment. So I hope that answers your question, Katie. I'm going to cheat and actually look at the immunisations here. SARS, okay. Okay, so if I look for SARS, yeah, okay. Oh, there. So I'm going to try that again. See if we can solve. Oh, okay, right. Let me see. So it would be one of, I guess it would be one of these that you would use. So you maybe choose a number of those that you would search on, and of course, as I say, you can choose multiples of those. So you could add as many of those as you needed to. I'm going to go a bit crazy and add a lot of them, but even then, I'm not sure that that's all good. And then you would run that report again. I've got a feeling that it might come up as 0, but yeah, okay. So I've chosen the wrong medication. So, but that's how you would do that search. I think it's probably worth mentioning with searches for immunisations that there may well be an existing search that you could use. So it might be worth checking that there is if there is an existing search that actually covers that already, either in the EMIS library, or if you use the Ardens searches, I would imagine that Ardens already have a search that will cover that, and that will allow you to capture that information. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Got a little bit over time, but is any other questions? Yeah, so just a few top tips, which we've kind of covered. And I'll just say thank you very much for attending, and I will email everyone out the slides, and if you could do some feedback, that would be really useful for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. That's been really informative. we've really enjoyed that, and I'm sure when we put it into practice we'll have loads of questions, but yeah, thank you very much for that.
Pleasure.